Hi, the channel is Animation Pandemic. My name is Amedeo Beretta and this is animation feedback. In this case we have Simone. Thank you, Simone, for sending over the animation. Now let's have a look at this thing. And as I press play, okay, there is progress from the last version. If we compare, the last version was a lot harder. The arcs were more difficult to track. Now let's have a look and see if we can improve this even further. The first thing that I noticed in the main turn at the beginning is that the top part of the body seems to move as a single piece for the most part. And there is a bit of a curve going on in here, but then as the character comes back, the body is dead. It's just a piece of wood that is moving back. So the general perception is that the body is just translating left and right, which it's something that could be definitely improved upon. And this is particularly true if you look at this view in here. If you track the body, you can tell that there is no internal economy. It's just the body is just rotating. That's it. That's how it feels. Perhaps you moved a lot of controls in there, but it doesn't show, and that's the problem. So I think you have to decide if you want the chest to land before the hip, for instance, so that then the hip lands. You see what I'm let me delete this key. So you see what I mean there. So that the chest will be there already, and then the hip will come back, would reach the pose, and then you want, again, as you come back, as you recoil, you want to decide whether it's the chest that leads the action or the hip that leads the action. Right now you have a single piece of geometry, solid, that doesn't really it's not flexible. It needs to be flexible there. So think about which part comes first and last, decide that, and then let's see it again. I don't really know which, I mean, given that this is cartoony animation, it's really up to you what you want to have to as a lead of the animation. I would probably, noticing how the head seems to move the most, I would probably imagine that you want the chest to drive the action at the beginning, but I'm doing that just because your animation is telling me that, okay? There is no given rule in here, but I would imagine that if I decided, like you seem to have done, if I have decided that the head is leading the motion, then I would have the chest move first, and then as the hip reaches position, the chest would straighten up vertically and you would reach the position with the top part there. I also think that you could go on to, you could keep all the poses between 22 and 26 a bit lower, maybe even by this amount. You can put the root on a layer and see how that goes, and in which case you would probably have the root on a 0 key on the layer at 20, and then at 22 or 23 you would have the root going down in the layer, and then at 26 you would still have the root down, and then at, I would say, probably 29 or 30 I would go down to the 0. That's how I would try to improve that. In terms of facial expressions, I think now they work much better. They're a lot clearer now, so well done there. I would probably, in here, I would probably give the opening of the eyebrows 1 or 2 frames longer. This is just a lot of action for a single frame, or rather, it's a lot of action for a single frame without any follow through. So if you want to open it that much, well, you can try that, but then in the next frame go a lot higher in a moving hold so that we can see the motion there. Or you go up to this pose in 2 frames instead of 1, and still you will need a bit of moving hold up there. Just a second, I'm just looking at stuff, and let's have a look. it would be great if the elbows took a bit more part in the follow-through action. So now you're pushing forward this elbow, which is great. Why don't you keep the elbow moving forward even on 28 a tiny bit, and then on 31 let it go back a tiny bit as well. Let it go towards the back of the character, because otherwise it feels like the elbow is moving one-to-one with the body, which is probably not what you want it to have. And for the left elbow, I think it doesn't make sense that the elbow rotates one-to-one with the head in here between 20 and 21. If anything, it should be delayed by 1 or 2 frames there, so it should stay there, and then it should start rotating back as the body moves to the right. And after the body stops moving to the right, like you're doing here, I think it's fine for the elbow to come forward. But then I would keep it forward 1 more frame in there, and then I would move it back at around 31 or 32 so that it settles maybe 1 or 2 frames after the body. For the scared jump and take, what you could do in there is similarly to what you've done with the facial expression here, for which we keep the facial expression down a couple of frames. I think it would be even more it would make even more sense to do the same with the body here. So if you track the arcs again of the core in here, you will find out that your arc is this way, which is probably not what you want to do, right? But again, you're doing it. So it seems to me that you need to be a lot more focused on this thing. You need to put a lot more focus over tracking arcs, because every time we see it, we find out that we have to track arcs in one place or another, you know. And it's normal that while as you learn, you tend to forget stuff and you forget to track a wrist or whatever. But in here we forget to track the core of the character, which is a big deal, because whatever happens to the core will happen to these guys, this guy, 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 this guy. Okay, so not tracking the arc of the core is a big, massive deal, and you really need to work around that. You need to get used to track that arc. Okay, then you know, if you get a bit of the tracking the arc of the knee or the heel or the tape, you know, that can be fixed easily on. But if you don't track the arc of the core and you spline the rest, the moment now you have to track the arc of the core, you will have to probably respline everything else, which, trust me, it's not fun, and I speak from experience. Okay, so I would really put a lot more effort into tracking the arcs of the core at least, and I would definitely keep the core down for a couple more frames for a bit longer. You can have it go down and spend a few more frames down there and then speed up on the way out. Okay, because I feel like the anticipation to the jump is not strong enough. I feel like we just transition from up to down to up again. So this is the motion that we kind of get there, and you don't really feel like an anticipation. But if we went down and then come back up like this, for instance, so if you track my hand, it will go down slow and accelerate, then it would be a lot easier to read your anticipation. It doesn't have to be long, but a couple of frames down there will probably already make a difference, and you will find out that will change the internal dynamics of the body as well. Now let's see what happens in there. I'm not very convinced about this foot rotating already. I would imagine you can make a kick-off pose with this foot as well. So it could take off, say even 1 or 2 frames later. And the knee here is all broken. I think up here you want the knee to be there, and you know, I mean, you may find yourself in troubles placing the knee because the foot is too close to the body, but that's down to you. I mean, you could track the arc of the foot, and tracking the arc, always coming back, you could track the arc of the foot from the top view so that the foot is not that close under the body, for instance. So that's also an option, and you should definitely consider that, because this knee is all broken. I mean, I think in here really what you would like to have is something that looks like this somehow. Yeah, because right now that knee is just broken. So the arc of the right foot would probably work better if you tracked it a bit better. So, or well, rather, if you look at the arc, can you see that's the arc? Well, there's a bit more of an arc there, to be honest. But I think that, okay, if you have to decide what is it that you want the audience to see in here. And also, if this leg is so extended, you could twist the hip here to help the extension of the leg. That would allow you to go even further with the body and with the leg. Sorry. So I would really, if you plan to change the direction this quickly of the foot, because the problem is that we are going to see this transition. We are going to think the next foot position will be somewhere over here on this arc, and we have it down here, but then all of a sudden you change. So I would imagine that you could probably reach that position a lot earlier, so that you would have a couple of frames at the extreme, and then you would change direction, for instance, so that you give us enough time to read the change of direction. Right now you're just passing. So one of the things that now we have to learn, I think, is holding the pose just long enough for the characters to see it. And that was true for the facial expressions, the eyebrows up here, that works now. And now it's going to be true again for the core, as I just discussed. And you're going to make that true again for the foot. So you see how we started by ironing out, if you think of it, some principles that weren't quite there. And then now we find, as we refine, we find a new tier of revisions that we can unlock, because now that you learned to track the arcs a bit better, now we can actually learn how to keep the pose on an arc a bit longer, just to have the arc a bit more readable. And you see how the kind of feedback that you receive tends to be usually on the same nature across the board of your animation. So earlier on it was just arcs. Actually, earlier on at the beginning it was just about 3D posing. Now it's about arcs. Well, actually the previous review was about arcs, and now it's a bit of arcs, but now let's hold the poses, you know. I mean, just enough for them to be read. It doesn't mean you have to freeze a pose. It's just that if you want to have a transition like an arc like this one, if you go very quickly from this pose to this pose in just, say, one frame, then the audience is going to expect that the motion will be somewhat going in that direction. The brain will make that math for us. So if you all of a sudden change, it will be harder for the brain to read these three poses as an arc. So what you tend to do in animation for an arc like this one, which needs to be very quickly, is you either you can perhaps accelerate, and you see you're describing a bit more of the arc in there already. And then as you change, we will have seen this part of the arc a bit better. And the fact that the horizontal translation at this point, say between pose A to B, let's call them this way, the horizontal translation is very minimal. The brain will think, okay, well, we are moving a lot down that way, but not much down this way. So if we now change and we go towards this direction, it would probably be better to draw this sort of vector in green. So if what will happen is that, okay, I will go through what I believe the human perception is, because I don't think I can speak from a scientific point of view, is we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So actually this is 3 and this is, yeah, and this is 4 and 5. Okay, cool. So between 1 and 2, the brain is going to read, okay, we're moving a lot to the right and a tiny bit down. Between 2 and 3, the brain is going to expect to see more of that movement to the right, and in fact you give them this movement to the right, and a bit more of the way down. That's fine, that's cool, that works for us. Now between 3 and 4, and 4 is down here, the brain has understood that we are moving towards the right, so you do not need to push that much to the right. You can reduce that. and you can increase the movement on the way down. So you see that at every transition we give the brain just one piece of information to track, just one main vector, and the other one is, if you get it, it's fine, otherwise, well, too bad. So between 3 and 4 we reduce the movement to the right, and the brain starts to read, okay, so we're not moving them much to the right, so are we maybe we are going to stop the right movement later on, or we're going to reverse it. I'm ready. So you're setting your audience for a payoff, so to speak. And then in fact between 3 and 4 we accelerate on the way down a lot more. If you think of it, at the beginning there was very little, then a little bit more, and now there's even more. So we are establishing that now we're changing the direction. The horizontal vector is diminishing, the vertical one is increasing, and then that means that the brain now understands that we move less and less to the right, and it won't expect a sudden change to the right, a sudden increase in speed. So if we change the direction now, it's going to be a lot more readable. That's how I see it anyway. But I mean, again, do not take this as a golden science. Science in here is just my idea based on my experience of what people understand of motion and what I understand of motion rather. So down here, similarly, I think that if you had some sort of arc for which we move a lot faster to this pose, and then we have one more pose down there, or even, I would say probably even a bit more vertical, then if you change the direction, you give us a bit more direction there, and then you can accelerate, then the arc will be a lot clearer, and you wouldn't be holding the character still. You're just slowing down in areas to let us rest and appreciate the change in motion. You have to keep in mind, of course, that this whole character is moving here. So I mean, it will be just too much for us to read all different arcs at the same time. There's no time. There's no way I can really understand what's going on in here, and I will never. By the way, it's just too much motion. But by breaking down the motion so that you slow down in certain areas, you make it a lot more readable. Plus, you could use those moments of pose to accelerate other parts of the body. So you keep on driving our attention to one part or another, okay? The arc of the left arm is a lot better on the way down. Now it's a lot softer, you can see it yourself. It would have been great if you tracked the top view a bit better, because we're moving that way, so it seems, but then we change and go down this way. That's actually not too bad, but you see that I think the fingers could go a bit more to the back in there, and then just swing in position a bit better. So the same thing you did down here on the way down, which is really cool, nice smooth accent, you could do it vertically from the top view. Instead, the top view is just, if you think of it, the top view is just sort of translating this way. You're just not calculating the arc there. Do it. It will improve your animation. And similarly, you can track the arc for the elbow. So as the wrist is very high, the elbow could be a lot more in, so that after, when the elbow is when the wrist is at its maximum vertical motion here from the top view, you can open up the elbow a bit more. I suspect you may help a lot more with the clavicle and move the clavicle back as well there. And for the right hand, same thing. You're going fairly straight this way, and then you give us a bit of an arc there and a bit of an arc, which works a lot better, and you go back very fast there. But then I would expect something like this to happen, but I don't see it happening there. So that's a bit strange. I would need to be closer to it to know what goes on there, but I think that's the problem. And like you're doing for this finger, for which you're just translating it, what happens to this wrist is that all of a sudden here it is just translating. Look at the bend you have in the wrist in here, and you can see that it was rotating until, say, this point, and then it stops rotating and it's just translating. But certainly there will be a bit of this motion, right? A bit of overlap there. So you need to put that in if you really want to have really polished animation there. Then now let's see the facial expressions in the end. So I think now it's a lot clearer without all those changes of emotions that you had in the previous version. So if we check the previous version, you remember how there were 2-3 different expressions going on. It's just a matter of 8 frames. I mean, and there were cool expressions, don't get me wrong, but it was just too much stuff going on in just too little a time. So I think in here what you can try and do would be to I would try and do not go up with both eyebrows at the same time. That looks really machine-like. Keep one eyebrow down and closed on frame 43, so that will keep that pose a lot lower, and that means that on 44 you will still not be completely open. One eye will be open but not both, and then it will open up there. In here, the rotation of the head is a bit confusing, if you ask me. There's a lot of movement going that way. And I don't think you need to go so profile. I think you can keep the character a bit more 3/4 there, so that we see the mouth and the nose a lot better there. And then as you come back down, I would probably try and keep the facial expression open for one more frame there at 53. So maybe one of the two eyes, the right eye will still be a bit closed, but the other eye will still be open, so that you can squish down in 1, 2, 3 frames perhaps, and just be a lot more closed down here. And you stay down a couple of frames being closed, just like in the previous take, and then actually you can stay down even 3 frames being closed, I think, and then starting at 57 or 58 you can open up a bit more. I mean, you can even keep this pose, but this pose is super symmetrical, or so it feels. I think it would work a lot better if this area was a bit higher and this area was a bit lower. And if you move this eye a bit more to the left, and you could even camera left, and you could even close it a bit and open up this guy a bit more, and that will give you, I guess, a bit of a nicer pose. I'm not going to comment on the tail yet, because as you know, I mean, until the arrested animation is working, I wouldn't even check the head, the tail, and plus you're not tracking the arcs of the core, it seems, so I wouldn't even touch the tail. If the core isn't working, fixing the tail in there is just a waste of time. And that's it. So well done, it's going in the right direction. There's still, I mean, there are limits, of course, to this animation because you're learning, but it's getting there. It's a lot better than it used to be just a few versions ago. If you check what you had in the first splining, it was a lot harder, a lot more confused if you think of it. Now with this new iteration, the movement is a lot nicer, a lot cleaner, and the arcs are a lot clearer, in fact. So well done. And now let's move on to the next step. Have fun.
Very good, blood circulation, heart problem, hormone problem.